I think since it's almost 5 after, we'll go ahead and get started because I do like to try to start and stop on time. I believe that Mary Keller is also going to be joining us. This morning, I want to start out just with the first document is a reopening template. I just want to be sure the committee is aware of it. It came out yesterday at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so what the State Department has done with the opening template is they've taken the 50-page document and put it into like 7 or 8 pages. And so I just want you to see it. They've given us the template for the front page. How they want us to fill things out, all the way down to, it needs to be 11 font, needs to be in PDF. So they've given us some of those requirements. Then what they've done is on the inside, thank you, Mike. Yeah, that page 2 would be great. Is they've gone through and they've pulled out what are the requirement components and tried to put those into one document. So you really have to now look at the 50-page document and then you look at this document as well. So I've been going through and just cross-referencing because we had to look at what's required versus what's guidance and what are the guidance components that we're actually going to use for our district. And I believe, Sasha, we did get this on the website, I think, this morning very quickly for us. So people that do want to find it, if you click on the reopening tab, it's there. But again, it's helpful in that they have at least pulled out some of those requirement components. So I'm going through and cross-referencing all of those required items because we have to have them in our plan. Mike, do you want to go ahead and scroll through the next page? I'll just kind of how they've laid it out. And I don't really consider this so much of a template just because it really is just the statements on, what we need to be doing. They haven't really given it to us in a format where they necessarily want the plan to look like this. But again, on the daily operations, right towards the bottom of the screen there are lots of things that are strongly encouraged, encouraged where feasible. And again, this goes back to the conversations we've had in our first few meetings on like stable cohort. What is the size of a cohort? And we're going to continue between now and September to try and define, what is the reasonable size for the cohort. And I'm really hoping that perhaps even the CDC will give us clearer guidance before September, or regional guidance from the state health. Mike, I think we'll go ahead and flip over to the other document. So this is just to let you know it's out there. It just came out yesterday. We do already have it on the web for people, and it was late yesterday. So from that, this is just to give you an idea. Sorry, Dr. Carabillo is just joining us as well. This is just to give you an idea where we are in putting our own document together. So I went ahead and we formatted the front page, obviously, to meet the spec that they sent late yesterday. And the way that we are formatting our plan and our document is very simplistic. And I say that because I want people to be able to read it. When you look at the 50 pages that we have from the state, it's a little overwhelming. There's a lot to parse out. There's some items that aren't applicable, for Greenwich, and then many that are. So one of the first things we'll have to do, and we'll do this in conjunction, obviously, with all of the different medical and health professionals, is determine where we are in phase 1, 2, or 3 for COVID. And again, we all know with COVID, it can change in a week, it can change in a day. Right now, we're pretty much in what we would call low status, which is return to school with social distancing as feasible as possible, and pulling the language from the state that they're using, feasible as possible. We still have a lot of requirements that say 6 feet. When you look at the community at large, for schools, they're saying feasible as possible, and that could be 3 feet. So it's not really defined for us, which is a little tricky. We do have enhanced protocols for cleaning, personal protective equipment, like masks are required, the cohort grouping, thoughtful arrival and dismissal to mitigate the high contact zones. What we're going to have to, and one question that this committee will have to grapple with a little bit, is, are all of our buildings low status, or do we have a building like the high school we're going to consider moderate status, which is return to school with a hybrid schedule to reduce the number of students in contact? And I say that because we know that in phase 1, if we bring all of our students back at the high school, social distancing is not feasible in the building with 3,000 students. So is high school going to be a phase 2 and elementary and middle of phase 1? And that will be a decision point, obviously, that the Board of Ed will have to discuss at some point. And not looking for decisions today, just planting that seed that We have that's a big decision point for us, is what does it look like if we really can't social distance in a feasible manner, let alone 3 foot to 6 foot. So the other end that you see just below phase 3 is the alternate available to families, the alternative available to families. And this is a requirement. And I'll just note what you see in blue on the bottom, and we're going to do this all throughout our planning document. That's the reference to that 50-page document. So anytime you see the page number at the end, you'll know what page of the 50-page document where the guidance comes from. So if somebody wants to go and read a little bit more about it in a deeper way, they can do that. And this option is for remote learning. And again, the state is calling distance learning remote learning. So we're kind of using those interchangeably right now. But remote learning for those students and parents who choose not to participate in face-to-face instruction. And this is going to be a big issue for us. We also alternative available to staff who are faced with medical conditions to work through HR and determine a teaching and or their leave status. That can be a big issue for us. Those of you who haven't seen the survey, we did launch it yesterday to families, and we sent out about 7,200 surveys, because it's families. So you have to keep in mind, even though we have over 9,000 students, because it goes to the families, it's 7,200. We very quickly had 1,900 responses, which is really good for the first day. We expect that most people are going to want to take that survey. We will push it out again for those who have not responded that might have missed it. We'll do that at least 2 more times. And as of the late yesterday or early this morning, we have 22% of our families who are not comfortable returning. And as you know, in the last meeting, when we talked about this nationally, they were saying it could be around 20%. We actually have 2 schools right now, and it's still very early, that are running 30%. Those are high numbers. And while it adds a complexity to how we offer remote learning and the number of students, number of teachers trying to match that up, and then the students in the building. You know, the good thing is if you end up having 22 to 30%, our high school challenge may get easier, because if you don't really have all 3,000 students coming back, and you think about, you know, 360 or so, about 638 students that may not come back, that's a lot. So this survey is going to be really important for us, just getting the information on the number of students. It will help with social distancing if we end up having really numbers that look like that. Sometimes
Hey, Tony?
Yes.
The 2 schools that were 30%, were they elementary?
1 elementary, 1 middle right now.
1 middle, okay.
Mm-hmm. But again, you know, it's early, so it could change, but generally when you have a pretty good response rate, you find statistically it doesn't change a great deal. But this is such a hot topic that, you know, people who are really nervous may have taken the survey right away, where somebody else who's not as anxious about it, like I'll do it over the weekend. So we'll be watching it. I'm sure this will be my entertainment over the weekend, is survey watching. But just because it is so important to the planning piece, if you have that volume of students who are going to be remote learning, because we're going to have that volume of teachers who are handling remote learning also. So go ahead, Karen.
I just wanted to ask, I know you were also going to be sending a survey to teachers to see what their level of comfort was. Has that gone out as well?
It goes today.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes today. It's all set to go. Any questions on phase 1, 2, 3, or on the alternative that will be available to families? And again, that's a requirement for us to offer remote learning.
Tony, I have a question. Alternative available to staff, what will be the process to work through HR to determine, sorry?
Yeah, we're going to have the protocol is going to have to come along behind that. And right now it's trying to figure out, does it require a doctor's note? Usually if you're going to be on leave, you would have a doctor's note. So do we have staff who are not able to work at all? And that's a different level of doctor's note versus how do we determine if in fact we had 22 to 30% of our kids in distance learning, for instance, in a building, how do you determine the staff who are going to handle remote learning? Because a teacher can't do face-to-face and remote at the same time, same day, same time. And so that's going to be a process in and of itself. And that's why we need to know the number, because the number of staff we need to remote teach, it could be greater than the number of staff who would choose to remote teach, for instance, if that makes sense. that need to stay home or want to stay home. But we're going to have to determine that very carefully through an HR protocol.
Well,
Karen?
sorry. This is Karen Hirsch. Sorry, that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask as to when you think you might have some information on staffing, because obviously you can't, as you just said,
Yep.
have teachers teach at the same time as do distance learning. I know how much time and effort is put into both, and our contracts certainly cover the number of hours for our teachers. But and the other question I was going to ask specifically for this is, do we have any information yet on individuals who are coming new into the system, as in, you know, people that have moved here? As you know, real estate has been flourishing since the start of COVID here.
Yeah, right. I mean, right now our numbers, it's still early. This is still very early, believe it or not, for enrollment, but our numbers are staying very stable as far as where we were projected and where we are. What we are seeing are spikes, for instance, in kindergarten at Parkway and OG, and where we were going to have, for instance, 2 sections and now there's 4. So they're pretty large spikes for kindergarten. And both of those are kind of high real estate markets, supposedly right now. Yeah, where you have the larger yards and people that may have been looking for that coming out of New York City. But whether or not that's the reason, but it is a large spike in those 2 elementaries in early childhood. But overall, we're staying pretty relatively the same. Any other questions on this first phase 1, 2, or 3, or the alternative available to families? Okay, go ahead and go to the next page. Thanks, Mike. So what I'm trying to do as we put this document together is really make it checklist oriented. And the goal for the document is, if I'm a principal, you know, I can look at my building, I can do the double check. It's a district level document, but we want everybody to understand it. And what we don't want people to feel like they have to spend 16 hours over a weekend trying to study a document that is hard to read. So everything is checklist formatted so we can make sure we don't miss anything, that our health related people, our custodians, everybody knows what their responsibilities are. And this document is not finished. Obviously, we just got the information Monday night, but I'm just giving you kind of a glimpse of how we're planning and putting this together. So first of all, we're going to have to determine the status. Are we phase 1, 2, or 3? And again, is that going to be different for one of our buildings versus another, just based on what we can or cannot do within the building? We feel very good about low status for K-5. We worked a little bit on just staffing conversations yesterday. Feel pretty good about middle school. Right now it's high school. And so it may come down to how many kids are really going to be on site and how many opt for remote learning, because that may help us keep the high school at a low status. And then we have to look at the cohort grouping status. Right now, we have not had a change from the health professionals at the state level, CDC level, of cohort grouping. So if you think about it as 50, that's pretty much like, generally it could be a 5th grade, that's a cohort, or a 3rd grade. Or if you look at it from a middle school perspective, their teams are usually around 100. So if the cohort stays at 50 like it is now, it would only be half of the team that should stay together. We do anticipate, from what the medical professionals are saying, that this could go up to 100 or 150. And that does include the teacher. So you have to include the adults in that cohort grouping. But that, again, is very important in how kids move around the building, how it impacts the schedule. So we have to be able to answer these 2 questions. And these could change the week before school starts. So when we talk about being nimble, it's you plan for the most challenging and then you loosen up when we're able to do that. Our health-related input for decision making, this is just making sure that before we decide what level we're at, what the cohort grouping is, that we've checked all of these resources that we are expected to check. We check with the Greenwich Health Department. We'll check with Dr. Noble. Remember when she was on the call with me, and Mary Keller, as I was making the decision last time to shut the doors. The World Health Organization, Connecticut Department of Health, the CDC, and the CDC has the compliance document just for schools. And then, of course, the document that was just issued, just going back through and making sure we haven't missed something. Okay, go ahead, Mike. Transportation. So when you look at transportation, we basically have a phase 1 low status. Phase 2 is moderate status. So for phase 1, it's a full busload of kids. and they wear their mask, whether you're in phase 1 or phase 2, and that's per the Connecticut document requirement. And it has to cover their nose and their mouth, and the mask must be in place before they get on the bus and remain in place while they're in transit. And you'll notice that it really isn't any different for moderate status. So that is where we are for busing right now, is you run the buses and everybody that gets on has a mask on. COVID critical is obviously bus service is suspended. And COVID critical is really when you're looking at full remote learning. That's if it really happens like it did last March for us. However, the door has been left open that, let's say we're kind of at an in-between phase, a 2 and a 3, it's just starting to spike, or one building is just starting to spike. And so we're closing one building, not the whole district because of something that's happening. But we do feel like our unique learners, special education, EL students could still have services in a safe way. Perhaps due to the cohort they were in or a multitude of different reasons, we could still run a bus service with social distancing that looks very much like that CDC restrictive guideline. And again, that would be in a very unique situation, but trying to make sure we're providing the best service we can for everybody. When you look at the protocols that are just under there for transportation, again, these are requirements, and that's why they also have that page 15 on there. It's so that people understand it's not just, this is not a local decision. The face mask for the buses, if they forget to bring one, we need to have them on the buses available. So every bus will have to have some masks ready. We have to board the bus with the first student who gets on the bus must go all the way to the back seat. Generally, you know, every bus driver handles this a little bit differently, but this is a very tight protocol. And then as they exit the bus, they must start at the front seat, and then you work your way back very slowly and methodically. And the mask must be worn at all times, including boarding and exiting the bus. So those, again, those are all requirements if someone is going to access bus service. Let's go ahead and look at food service status. So again, for food service status, you're looking at what phase are we in for COVID. So phase 1 is a low status, which a low status does mean that students may eat in the cafeteria with their cohort if social distancing of that 3 to 4 feet can be maintained. And this is really a school site analysis, which will be done in August with our admin team. We need to take a good look at the cafeteria. If the cohort size is 50, obviously that's a little bit easier to social distance in most of our cafeterias. We would probably be okay. If we have a grade level, for instance, that has 80 students on it, they have a couple of sections, it may be more difficult if we're trying to social distance. This is really looking at a brown bag or box lunches are served to the students because we cannot have lines for lunch. So we no longer have the line, the kids come in, they sit down, social distancing, we have to deliver those lunches out to the students. And again, it's to mitigate all the touching, that aspect for food service. The moderate status is when children would eat in their classrooms. And again, we could have some buildings that are in moderate status because of the number of children in a cohort or the number of children on a grade level and the number of children that can fit in the cafeteria and social distance. If you're a building that has, especially in elementary where you have four sections of kindergarten, you may not be able to fit 4 sections. A building that has 2 sections, that may work. So this status is going to be building based is what I'm saying, more so for lunch than it is district wide. We have to assess each building and that'll be done in August. Work will start now, but we're watching the enrollment is impacted by enrollment. Go ahead, Mike. Oh, sorry, Karen.
Oh, no, just one question. When it comes to food services, I know, you know, if we're talking about making sure that if we have to have a boxed or bagged lunches for students, I wanted to just sort of see what we might need to look into in case we want to be able to offer pre-plated or hot lunches as well, because this is opposed to just having a sandwich every single day or what have you. I don't know if we're looking into that.
Yeah, right now we're not. We hope that if the status is really not only phase 1, but we feel like we're not in a phase at all. Let's say COVID just doesn't reemerge. At that point, we could actually change our approach to food service. But right now, just given the number of staff that we have and the additional of serving children instead of children coming through the line, most of our elementary cafeterias only have 2 people. So we don't even have the staff to really manage the additional task along with cooking. And we are actually going to follow the same process we're doing right now where all of the sandwiches will be made at the high school, and then the brown bags are going to get dropped off, just because it takes a whole team just to even put those together. It's quite a large team. Any other questions on the food service, Katie?
All right, I just wanted to backtrack a little bit on the health-related input. The one resource I'd love to add to that list would be the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Sure.
And even just the vaccine protocols and recommendations come from the AAP, which they work in collaboration with the CDC, of course, but that's a great resource. And I know there are so many people working hard to make sure that that the right thing is done for our children. And I know that's only half of this because we've got the staff. That's the other set of needs that we need to address.
Absolutely. I can add that easily.
Well, they just released their own guidance as well for reentry to school. So I don't know if you need to have that, posted or anything.
Yeah, I've actually got it on my table. I don't know if I've got it posted, but I definitely have it.
Tony?
Any other food service questions?
Yes, Mary.
Sorry, I can't see everybody. Let me see if I can.
It's Mary.
Yep, go ahead.
But depending on the grade and cohort, we may need an additional table for gluten-free.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we just might have to, depending on the grade again, some grades it won't matter. Other grades you may need at least one table to be able to separate out gluten-free kids. So
The allergies,
Yeah.
not just gluten.
Yeah, that really won't change from what our normal practice would be. We always have to be responsive to that, whether we're in COVID or not. And so the principals, when we're setting up those cafeterias for distance, that'll be part of that consideration as well. But we can certainly put it on the document, and that may make parents feel, that we haven't forgotten about that piece. So we can add.
Just may mean you're going to be able to have that many fewer tables in the cafeteria.
Right.
You have to set some aside for 2 kids.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Any other questions on food service? Okay, outside recess and looking at playgrounds, just going outside. Again, it's limiting our cohort use, staggered outside times. If the cohorts are 50, that means outside as well. If cohorting is 100, 150, this gets much easier. Hand washing and sanitizing before and after outside exposure. Again, this is in the guidance document. The mask can come off if we're in a phase 1 low status, if social distancing is utilized and monitored, but they may come off in phase 2 moderate status if social distancing and smaller cohort approaches are utilized and monitored. Now, this is coming really from medical guidance, and I don't know, Katie, feel free to weigh in on that, but we even talked last week about how children would take the mask off just to get fresh air outside. But again, it's going to have to be the smaller cohorts, social distancing. It will not be easy, depending on really on any age level. Probably a little bit easier for high school who wants to sit out front, kind of in the entry there and get some fresh air. But the mask wearing, will be a little bit of a challenge. So we're looking at how kids enter and exit the building if they're going out to get that fresh air, and where their mask would be, and how we would, how you make sure they don't get them mixed up. Somebody picks up the wrong one. It has its own complexities as well. Any question on outside recess or playground, or Dr. Noble, did you want to share anything about?
I just think realistically, I think this is going to be very, very challenging. I don't know how we are going to keep kids on a playground at least 3 to 6 feet apart. I don't know how many monitors you're going to need to, I don't know. I have to,
well, I think
honestly,
yeah, I think that, one of the things that we also have to do from an educator standpoint is re-educate ourselves a little bit, and is teaching children games they play that enhance social distancing. And overseas, because they're ahead of us, they started this, before we did, and they've all gone back through reentry. There are a lot of new games that have been created for children that we need to teach them. And they're still fun, but it does maintain more social distancing and helps them certainly think of other ways without even drawing so much attention that it's for social distancing, but just what are the games that you can play on a playground. And I think that we need to do that work through our PE staff as well. There are lots of things through PE where we can teach children, but that's all part of reimagining what school looks like. But maintaining as much normalcy as possible for young people and for children. But part of that is up to the educator aspect. But it will be
Yeah,
hard.
that makes perfect sense. It has to be structured play because children are like magnets.
Yeah.
If you throw them on the playground, they're just gonna, it's like they're glued together. I think that's gonna be very difficult. But we'll have to tackle that challenge.
Yeah, it will be a challenge. And I think that, I think we can help them learn some new things that are still fun too.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Karen.
oh, I was just going to say, Mr. D'Amico, since I can't call him Principal D'Amico now, has run an elementary school for years, and I'm sure can probably address some of the concerns and ways. I know he's always been exceptionally excellent at keeping the kids safe on playgrounds. So I'm sure, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, not to put you on the spot, but.
I'm actually looking forward to addressing that challenge. It is going to be difficult. Kids naturally gravitate towards one another. It's a social interaction. It's an opportunity to be closer than they normally are during the school day. Kids see each other from different classrooms at recess and at lunch. So it's going to require us to do what we do, starting with day one on kindergarten, teaching kids how to navigate their own personal space and being more mindful of that. And that's just going to be a lesson that we're going to have to underscore with the older kids as well, who habitually do gravitate towards one another, walk in pairs or in triads. You know, it's going to be relearning the equipment, repurposing the actual physical layout. It'll take some thoughtful considerations, but I think it can be done. Anything can be done. I just think we certainly have to be creative about it.
Yeah, there was a school in China where the children, when they returned in the younger grades, had on almost like a tank top that was built with a hula hoop at the bottom. And it was to keep the hula hoop distance. I had only seen that at one school, but teachers are definitely creative. Educators are creative. So we're gonna tackle the challenge and make it work. For facilities and security, this is for phase 1 and phase 2. And again, a lot of these are requirements for us. The multiple door and staggered entrances for each facility. And again, this is to maintain social distancing between individuals. So the document in this instance doesn't say we must use multiple doors, but that's part of the guidance is that's one way if we use multiple doors that you can maintain social distancing. So again, this will come back to each building because all of our buildings are structured differently. They have different numbers of entry and exit points. And it could be a classroom that opens directly to the outside that children can actually enter their classroom. And there are going to be some challenges here in that some of the things we've practiced for, well over a decade for school security is very contradictory to what we need to be doing for COVID, for entry and exit. From a school security standpoint, generally you want minimum points of entry into a school. You want doors shut, you want windows closed. For COVID-19, they're giving us the opposite advice. So we are really gonna have to be very thoughtful to make sure we're balancing both of those with care, safety, security, and then obviously COVID as well. The floor guidance mapping, this is just directionality, entrances and exits. You see them, in all the grocery stores and everywhere we go, and that will be very helpful for children as well. The mapping for the restrooms, how they enter. All of our water fountains will be closed. There will be some cups available in the classroom if they need a sip of water out of the sink, if they brought their water bottle and it ran out because the water fountains are closed. The tissue grabs, we talked a little bit about that in the facilities on Tuesday's meeting. Outside every restroom, because we must have the no-touch entry and teach children how to do that. Again, that's from page 10 of the document. There'll be a trash receptacle right outside. The no-touch paper towel dispensers. Again, that's, eliminating the blow dryers. Those must be disconnected or removed. The hand sanitizer has to be available, and we're making that available for all the classrooms. The guidance document says in those classrooms where you feel like it's safe, we've chosen to give our elementary teachers hand sanitizer. We will have that in their classrooms. They can put it up in a way because it's a younger student, but we feel like that's actually a level where sometimes washing your hands can be quite, it's not something that you do really quickly with 6-year-olds. So depending on the situation, they may need some hand sanitizer in their classrooms. The wipes are also going to be available in our classrooms, and each building sanitized throughout the day on door handles and all those other high-touch surfaces. And this is the Department of Health guidance document. And the building has to be disinfected in the evenings. And again, we have a product that's safe and non-toxic and proactive in eradicating the virus. And hand sanitizing available at entry and exit points. Go ahead, thanks, Mike. So any questions so far? Signage in all the restrooms, that's another thing that we have to do. Any questions on that component? And then I'm gonna do some of these subcomponents as well. Just there's a lot on facilities, I know. Mark, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Classroom spaces. So these are requirements. And again, these are all requirements that you do the best of your ability. So classrooms are set up to maximize social distancing. And we have classrooms that are 700 square feet and we have classrooms that are 1,200 square feet. So as you can imagine, you have the same, 20 children. It's different in a classroom of 700 than it is of 1,200 square feet. If desks are available, you achieve the 6 feet apart when feasible. Again, that's the language from the document. So they're still saying 6 feet when feasible, but it's okay if it's not 6 feet. So it's a little confusing, but again, we're doing the best that we can. And just as a reminder, a lot of our classrooms no longer have desks. I think that's also a point that's important to make. If they are available, if desks are available, they need to face the same direction. And that's not something, we haven't done that since 1980. Well, not maybe 1980, but I mean, you try to think of the really old classroom when you think of that. If tables are utilized, sit only on one side of the table to minimize the need for sharing high-touch supplies and materials. That means having the students have their own markers. They have their own, which they usually do have their own scissors, but they have their own art items, for instance, to do art with instead of having the items that are shared in a shared space in the middle of the table. We're no longer going to be able to do that. For our building use, we will not rent our spaces if we're in phase 1 or phase 2, which we did not do this spring, even when we closed down. We're not renting right now in the summer. And this is a challenge, and we will probably have some in the community who will be a little frustrated by this. But if we're in phase 1 or phase 2, we cannot get our buildings disinfected in the evenings if they're rented, and then feel like we're ready and safe for children and young people and our staff to come back to work the next day. So we will not be able to have rentals. Our before and after care may operate usual times, and that's italicized because in the document there's a guidance and it says before and after care at least 5 o'clock. Our before and after care go until 6 o'clock, and we can still accommodate that. And it's important for our families that rely on that service. If we go to before and after care, if in phase 1, can be usual times. If we go to phase 2, we may need to modify, because even in before and after care, we have the responsibility to try, which is almost impossible, to cohort as much as possible. Yet the children are coming from all different grade levels, all different classrooms. So if you're cohorting all day and then after care, you bring them all back together, it kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to have to work very closely with our before and after care programs on their social distancing because our parents rely on that service. The next one is visitors to the buildings. We do limit volunteer and visitors to essential. And again, that's from the guidance document, and that's going to be different for us. We're used to having quite a few volunteers and people that are in and out of our buildings. But if we are trying to limit exposure and we are adhering to the guidance for cohorting, we really can't have a lot of people inside the building that are coming from all other places. And again, that's from the document itself. Any questions on that?
Tony, it's Mary. I think we may need some specific guidelines for the early childhood classrooms where they tend to work in centers. So what's the maximum number of children in a center? What materials? How often does it have to be cleaned up? I think they're going to have a little bit different kind of requirement in terms of direction. Yeah. I would also ask that we ask teachers to minimize the stuff on the walls, the stuff in bins, the stuff, because the kids have to move around and keep social distance. Some of the classrooms are just packed with stuff. So
Yeah, this is really, for this piece of the document, there's a whole nother section that, and I think I may even have it listed when we get towards the back because it's not finished. The protocols that will go into the classroom for a teacher checklist, this is really the facilities. So if you look at the title for this piece, it's facilities and security. So this is when we're setting the classrooms up, the work that we are really equipping the classroom, how the teacher will operate within the classroom is going to have its own checklist for things like, although it wasn't necessarily in this guidance as much, at least that I have seen, things like getting rid of like pillows, things that are high touch, that all the children, depending on the types of materials, and we're going to have to get even more guidance on some of that, on what's allowed and what's not inside an actual classroom. But absolutely, and I think early childhood is definitely probably the most challenging. Will be preschool for sure. For the next section, it is the.
Before you move on, can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
I just want you were talking about before and afters programs, and I know some of the schools have, childcare outside vendors that come in to do before and afters or childcare. I just didn't know, if we've reached out to them to ensure that they'll still be able to run those programs, and just to have some kind of consideration if we're going to be running schools in a hybrid model where students are not in school every day, what we might be able to offer families if there is anything for the before and afters programs, if they feel that there might be some need.
Yeah, so
I know we don't have answers, but I just figured I'd ask.
Yeah, we reached out early on because they actually put their paperwork in with facilities to actually book their spot. And so right now they know they're all on hold just because we didn't know what phase we were going to be in or if we were going to be in school. So we just shut down the facility usage piece. Once this document's finalized, as this gets to the state, and it looks like we really are going to be in a phase 1 reopening, which is obviously where we are right now, we'll get all of that information back in the system for them, and they'll start putting those applications in. So they know they're kind of in wait and see mode right now, depending on where the school is. Did that answer that?
That answered that part of that question, but the other question is, and I know we don't have an answer, is depending on what our scheduling is, and I hope we'll be getting to discuss that soonish, but if we go back to, I know you may not know until the surveys are back in, if we go back to a week in, week out, or need to do a few days in, few days out model, if what we will be able to offer to parents, if anything, for befores and afters or whatever other child care options that we typically offer. I know each school offers something slightly different, but.
Yeah, and it's really right now when we talk about scheduling, like for our K-5, we're not looking at 4 days in or 4 days out or any of that, because at a phase 1 right now, we feel like we can bring our kids back to school. We're trying to keep our cohort sizes, as small as possible for class sizes. That's why the survey says, if you have, how comfortable are you? I can't remember the exact wording, but, with 20 students, we're looking at spaces. We're also looking at how you schedule, for instance, ALP. As you know, all of our elementaries have ALP. So you actually have a portion of the children that are having math and literacy and science already outside the classroom, which brings your cohort numbers down during instruction. So that complexity for scheduling, if we have a building where they're having an issue, where there's a spike within a building, there's something where they say we really need to shut a building down, then I think what you're asking is, would we have some sort of emergency sort of childcare? And that would just greatly depend on the status of the building and the safety and what's advised. The other thing we have to realize is that for us to offer something like childcare when you're shutting a building down is the employees themselves. It's not easy to get people that want to work in the middle of COVID if it's spiking, and because they feel like they're putting themselves and their families at risk. So that really comes into play as well. And we've already experienced that, even in areas like food service. There were people that were very nervous to be out handing out lunches right in the spike of COVID. And again, I'm grateful for those people because they made sure our children were fed, but it was not an easy task for them. So childcare, the state's view is do anything you can to help families have doors open so that families can get back to work and earn a living. And we're going to do the very best that we can to do that at all times. but that's going to be balanced with obviously our staff safety along with that.
Yeah. Well, I only meant if we open at level 1, but if we're trying to make sure that all of the students can return at the elementary level, I think it'll be covered that way. I just, I know parents who work are trying to figure out their schedules as well. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, you know, when I first started looking at scheduling and the complexity of doing that, if the guidance had said or requirement says it has to be 10 or 15, totally different ballgame. We would have to, like I say, we would have to either hire 60 teachers just for elementary, or go on some sort of hybrid schedule. But because right now the cohorting number is a little bit more open, and we feel like there's different ways to manage at the buildings, because we do have, we're keeping our class sizes, you know, balancing those class sizes along with the ancillary staff that actually work with children on a daily basis. And the OUT program is very helpful, because it does pull off a number of students that actually aren't in class for large portions. For communication, you're welcome. Communications. In this section, we have to designate our health and safety compliance liaison. So I'm working on that right now for this document. And then we have to communicate that broadly. And that's just, really just where do you send your questions and answers? We have a weekly district communication about our current status. In the height of COVID, it was several times a week, just to keep everybody very, very well informed. Right now, it's once a week. And we have updates to Facebook, Twitter, website, and our district plan when necessary. This plan could change at any point in time. If we do make a change to the plan once it's submitted, we have to resubmit it to the state again, but they're not checking plans, they're not okaying them, they're literally gonna sit on somebody's desk somewhere, but we do have to submit them. We also have our information that's posted on the website. We do update that every week, and especially with these meetings, what we talk about gets posted. We are surveying our families prior to the opening, which I mentioned went out yesterday. We're also surveying staff, which goes out today. And this is going to be very helpful for readiness to return. We are going to provide online video tutorials for families. It is a requirement that we actually educate on social distancing, hand washing and use of hand sanitizer, how to use face coverings, the respiratory and the cough etiquette, and enhanced cleaning disinfection of surfaces. And this comes straight from the document, page 10 and 18. And so we're going to do those through small online tutorial videos, just to keep it very simple. And this will also be part of the teacher training when we get to a professional development section. Question, Katie?
Oh, it's really more of a statement. It might be worth taking a look at like the CDC website. They may have videos that are already made, and sometimes it's best not to try to reinvent the wheel. And it's always easier, I think, as well, to offer information that's from like such an incredibly reputable source. I'd be happy to look into that.
Yeah, we absolutely will. As a matter of fact, there's a hand washing video that's fantastic. That's really, really short. And we'll use some of those when we can. It's just, we want to make it as personal as we can for the kids too. So it may be that even the principal does a little greeting. Hey, how to wash your hands.
Absolutely. No, I think the personal element is really key, but if we can weave in some of the best that the CDC has to offer, it might work in our favor too.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on somebody to send me a song for how to put a mask on for early childhood, because it's like somebody can make money off of that.
There was actually a really adorable video on the baby shark and hand washing. It might drive some people crazy, but there, Sesame Street may also have some resources, so it might be fun to kind of look into that. And again, I'm happy to help.
Great. Yeah, anything that you get, you can send us to Sasha and myself, and she'll start putting our repository together. So thank you. That's a great idea. Work with human resources to make sure all substitutes also watch the online tutorials. And that's a requirement, just making sure that we don't all of a sudden have a new substitute that shows up and they haven't gone through these required pieces as well. So behind that, that's how far along we are just in trying to get the checklist together. And I call it a checklist because I literally want us, as a system for the different departments to be able to make those checks that we haven't missed something or we haven't missed a requirement. And we still have to go through the health monitoring, our teaching and learning section. You know, what are the tools and resources that we have available for teachers? Things like Mary Ford was referencing about, you know, pillows and rugs. And I really need a little bit more guidance on some of that from the health professionals as well. The early documents talked a lot about making sure you removed a lot of those high touch things that children gravitate to in the classroom. And I don't want to assume that that's still the phase that we're in. So we have to gain better understanding, because the rugs are it's really part of even classroom management for little ones especially. The school site protocols, we'll still have a little bit more on transportation, and then also our professional development that's required. That's really important, again, for the teachers, and not only the requirement from the social distancing and all those videos we were just talking about, but they're also just the requirement in what remote learning is going to look like. If we start out face-to-face, we have to be very prepared to pick up, you know, that in a day and head back home. And I think we'll be much more prepared this time than we were in March, when we really didn't know what we were facing. And just making sure teachers have the tools and resources that they need as well, that when they leave the classroom, if they had to leave to go home to start remote learning, they know what to take with them. That was a challenge, obviously, this last time, because people thought we were going home for a few weeks and not a few months. And so we had to get those reopening times for people to re-enter the building, which was a challenge. So any questions about, you know, the format, any of the items that we went through from the committee?
I have two actually quick questions on what you were just discussing. Should we need to close schools and move back to either a hybrid model or distance learning? I know you'd mentioned it at a couple of the Board of Ed meetings, and I don't know if it's something that we've looked into, especially for the elementary school teachers who usually use their desktop computers within the schools. They did not have laptops to bring home. A lot of them just had their iPads, and I know some of the feedback I think that we had heard was that it was difficult for the teachers to be able to do some of the things they needed to do just using their iPads. I don't know if we're looking into what we need to provide for our elementary school teachers. Should we need to close their doors going forward? And then the other question, well, I'll let you answer that one first.
Yes, we are. As a matter of fact, we had a meeting just on this issue yesterday, and we're resolving that, and we are working on it today, as a matter of fact.
Okay, and then I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, and then the other question was, I know, you know, for those who don't always listen into the Board of Education meetings, I know that you had mentioned that summer school, which is going to be run with synchronous and asynchronous, some live, some, you know, self-taught models, is how we're going to be looking towards doing stuff going forward. I don't know if you want to just share a little bit about that, just for those who hadn't heard what you've already just shared about how we'll be revising our distance learning plans.
Yeah, so we were in a very different time. I think March, April, May, first of all, we'd never done this. We didn't have necessarily the platform set that we needed. We didn't have some of the materials that we needed. Everyone was trying to grapple with, how do you balance this? We had a flexible schedule, and interesting enough, even on the distance learning survey, some families really like the flexible schedule and some really want a schedule. But we're making a commitment to have a set schedule, so that if school's not in session, that you would still, you know, hop on and your teacher's there at 9 in the morning, and you would start with live. So we are using a mix between live and then also some of the platforms, because you also don't want children sitting on the computer screen for 6 hours and 5 hours straight. So it's still finding what is the right balance. But we will have a schedule. It is a mixture of live. We're using Google Meets, which is our district platform. We are working right now, and that was part of the conversation yesterday, is even enhancing what the Google platform can do. And we had great news yesterday that I did either this morning or last night, I can't remember when, but we're going to be able to upgrade the system and get that done before school starts, and very confidently so. So that was great news for us, because we wanted to take Google to the next level as well. So the platform will be enhanced for our teachers. And Google also is coming out with some enhanced features for Google Classroom, Google Meets, which is going to be very helpful. We have heard from our families, we have a lot of platforms. We are still going to have Schoology and Google Meets competing in the fall. And partly that's because so many of our staff have content built in Schoology. You can't say to a teacher that in September, we're just taking that away. You have to migrate content if in fact we were going to move to one platform or the other. That's a big conversation, but we'll have that conversation next fall. So it definitely will look different, Karen, and we're excited about it. We're having a good trial that will start next week in summer school, where they're on a set schedule, and we're going to see how it works and get feedback from teachers and families.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that. I know that that's a topic that I get a lot of questions on.
Yeah, absolutely. I answered an email this morning on that very issue. Any other questions on reopening? Any thoughts, ideas that anybody wants us to address in this document? So,
Tony?
Yeah.
Phase 1, 2, and 3, who ultimately determines a shift from one to the next?
If it's from the experience that we had last time, I would say it really comes down to the local health department. We have to have, even for this document, they have to be on board with the decision making. So the way that it worked for us in March, it was basically Dr. Noble and Mary Keller. And then we also were being advised by Caroline, who's over the health department for Greenwich. And it's rare that Greenwich would go against, for instance, something that state health, where the state health is sitting, unless it is regional, it could be, the last time it was a little bit, it was regional for Fairfield County, especially on this lower end of Fairfield County.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the people that are on this team, really. And ultimately, if they don't shut us down by executive order, it becomes the responsibility of the superintendent, to just like snow days. Only this is much harder than a snow day. But ultimately, that's what and my decision is really based on the health professionals, to really rely on the information. And sometimes it's hard. It was hard in March to make the decision. We were the first school district to make that decision to close, but it was right across the border next to us, and there were concerns. So, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Noble.
I just had a question about, do we have any more clarity about the expectation of the school system to notify parents if there's a positive COVID case? I think this is going to be a very complicated issue. I don't know if you were intending to cover that in another meeting. Maybe it's too soon to talk about it, but it's very pressing on my mind.
Yeah, Mary Keller, I don't know if you can speak to the current where the document is, because we've had several different iterations. It is a survey question, just to see how parents feel about that. But
yeah, we at this point in time, at least for summer school, we have, I don't think it's in the current document, but for summer school, we are obligated to notify parents. Clearly, we have to notify parents if there is an outbreak or someone in the classroom or a staff member who has COVID. So we have written, a health alert. Hopefully we won't have to use it because, there's minimal time in the classroom here for these students. But I had not seen anything that was a directive that you must notify in the new guidance. So we'll have to check and see if they're going to insist that we notify. But I believe that we're obligated to notify people, to put in the 14-day isolation and close the classroom down for cleaning.
And Mary, could you also just explain, when students are required to have a health form on file, are they required to sorry, there's a hornet near me. Are they required to put down the student's physician and make sure that that's like active on file? I'm just foreseeing the moment there's a notification that there's a COVID case, it's just, everything's going to go nuts, and it's going to be more than a full-time job to field all the questions. And we need to make sure that every student has an identified pediatrician or healthcare provider in the community.
We have a form that goes out to every student in the district. It's called Permission to Treat, and it gives us permission, the nursing office and the nurses, to treat their students and to make decisions until the parents can be notified. And on that form, in the elementary schools, it asks for their doctor and their dentist and emergency phone numbers. So we have all that, and it's usually updated. Well, it's required to be updated every year. It goes out in the summer school packets. If you want to take a look at it, it's currently on the website. It's called Permission to Treat.
Great. No, I just wanted to make sure everything should be in place for every student on that front. I mean,
Yes. Yep.
We may want to make sure that we tell parents as much as we can that kids won't be admitted without the form on file, because I know routinely they kind of dribble in a little bit in the first week. So I think we need to be really forceful that, you know, it needs to be on file and updated before the kid steps foot in the school, because we learned that from 9/11 with the emergency cards. You know, it happened so early in the school year, and not all the information had been on file at that point.
Well, Mary, we don't throw away last year's until we get this year's.
Right, but we don't know that it's accurate.
Yeah, we do try. Yeah.
well, I think it's really, really important because again, the moment that a notification goes out, you're going to have all these parents calling in a panic and wondering what they should do. And those questions really need to be funneled to their pediatrician and not through Mary Keller, or, I mean, not that you can't answer them, but I mean, how can you're not going to be able to handle the, you know, hundreds of phone calls that are likely to come in. So.
Yeah, I think that's where it comes back to having really good protocols. So, you know, when we, if we have a case and we shut the school down, you know, it's making sure we're communicating frequently and often, you know, with the families. And I think because families have lived through this too, you know, in March, April, it was pretty scary for everybody. And I think people have figured out how they're going to manage that component also for their families. The one thing that I did check on early on in March, April was for our families who may be economically disadvantaged, what is their access? And we do a great job in Greenwich of making sure that all of our families have access for those medical professionals, which I was very pleased when I found that out. So Greenwich is ahead of the curve in that area, which is very helpful for all of our families. Well, I always try to start and finish on time. It is 11:01, 1 minute past. So if nobody has any other questions, we will adjourn, and then I'll see you next week. And I hope everybody has a wonderful long weekend. And if you do have any parting questions, you can always email those when you're, you know, sitting by the beach this weekend and something pops up. Feel free to email me, and I can address it at our next meeting. Oh, Mary, put her mask on. Thank you. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.